Hey there. So I'm having a look at Monday the 10th of August 2026. I spoke about this week ahead in yesterday's episode, from Sunday the 9th right the way through to Saturday the, whatever it is, the 15th, I think. I can't remember. There's a lot going on. One of the underpinning aspects this week, which I think is the saving grace of this week, I think it's a really lovely aspect, and that would be the Grand Trine between Pluto and Uranus and Venus. And Venus in a trine to Pluto, that's exact as of Monday. I love this because this is great. To look at these particular planets, we've got Pluto, which is all about control, where we might need to ensure something's occurring, so this is a time when we might find it easier to regain control, reclaim control. We've also got Uranus in the sign of Gemini, which is really showing lots of options, lots of information, and some of that information can be quite shocking. And we've got Venus in Libra, who absolutely is a shining star, actually. Venus it rules Libra, and she's wanting things to come back into balance and come back into harmony. So what I really see as an overall energy this week is that we've got this gorgeous Venus, Pluto, Uranus trine, allowing us to make some very big decisions to create change for ourselves based on sometimes shocking information, and maybe sort of informing us a little bit about where control sits in our life and where it feels a bit uncomfortable. But Venus working with Pluto and Uranus, I think, is going to really help us move things along and possibly bring in some opportunities, which we could all do with, I'm guessing. So I like this. I think this is really helpful. However, on Monday, we've got a couple of other things, 3 other things, in fact, that I think are creating a difficulty and some discomfort. If you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable right now, you might have something in the early degrees of fixed signs. So, for instance, the fixed signs are as follows. So we've got Taurus, and right now we've got Chiron at 0 degrees. We've then got Mercury at 0 degrees in the sign of Leo, so that's another fixed sign. If you've got something in the early degrees of Scorpio, which I have, you'll be experiencing Chiron in opposition. You'll also be experiencing Mercury in a square. If you've got something in the early degrees of Aquarius, you're going to have a very similar scenario, only you'd have Pluto on there as well. So there's some discomforting energies, in particular Chiron and Pluto in their ongoing square, which I've mentioned a few times before. This square is coming in and out, and it's operational until 2032. So whatever is coming up between these two characters here, we're going to be feeling on Monday, because Mercury in a square to Chiron, and then later on this week, exactly in an opposition to Pluto, that's on the day of the eclipse. This is just showing where the fixed signs are really tightening up. So let's unpack this a little bit. So Mercury is obviously all about our ability to communicate and to share information and to move things around. And that can be money, it can be goods as well. And in the sign of Leo, he's very proud. So you might find at the moment that people, when they're talking in very fixed terms, indefinites, and they're very, very proud in what they're saying, and probably because they're proud, they don't want to back down. So there's that sort of risk that's coming up at the moment, that sort of stubborn, hurt pride that can get out of control. Now I say stubborn, hurt pride because Mercury is aggravated by Chiron square and also this approaching Pluto opposition. Now, yesterday when I was talking about Mercury going into Leo, I was talking about the possibilities and the opportunities, and I do think they're there, absolutely. However, that shadow side of Mercury into Leo is going to be showing up more over the next few days, but in particular tomorrow on Monday the 10th. So it's showing that sort of like need for the drama around the communications, and it can be quite disagreeable. So that's playing in the background. Now, Because Chiron is the wounded healer, this can really show up where there's a sore spot, a sensitive spot, and also a fear of where you might be dismissed. Chiron often shows us where we feel vulnerable, and also I think, a lot of vulnerability comes from not being seen, not feeling heard, not feeling supported. And so Mercury in a square here, it's really rubbing salt in that wound. Especially seeing as in the sign of Taurus, Chiron is there to try and bring us back into wholesomeness and to that feeling of belonging. Taurus does belonging in a beautiful way, really, truly about belonging. And so Mercury in the sign of Leo, in a square there, is really pouring salt in those wounds. And I think it can bring up all sorts of stories to do with work. It's in fixed signs, also to do with worth. In particular, like work, because Taurus is absolutely about money, and Leo is absolutely about status, and the razzle dazzle. And so this square could be really bringing in some issues around work and worth. And they can be really uncomfortable truths, and wounds and words coming together. It's like words wound. There you go. That's what I was wanting to say. So, yeah, this is a big energy. But we've also got a bit of a hurty energy here with Venus in an opposition to Neptune. So if you've got something this time in the early degrees of cardinal signs, you might be tuning into Venus at 3 degrees in the sign of Libra. And we've got Neptune at 4. Obviously, by this point, Venus will go into 4 degrees in opposition with Neptune. Now, again, I think yesterday I mentioned that both Venus and Neptune, they are the lovers of our solar system. They are both about love. Venus is the terrestrial love, and Neptune is that very cosmic love, that love that we can't really physically feel, but we maybe feel it at a soul level. We get that comfort from it. But there are odds. And whereas Neptune in Aries is getting a little bit hot under the collar. I mean, Neptune, yes, he's the god of the oceans and the seas and the water. And yeah, he has these great big stallions running through the water. I think that's why, the crashing waves are often referred to as the horses, like they're like running forwards, they're jumping over their jumps. I don't know what they're called. I'm not a horse riding person, obviously, as you can see. I don't know the technology, but like those waves are like, as they come crashing in, they're like, like horses, like charging through the water. He's known for like whipping up a tempest when things feel right. And in the sign of Aries, Neptune in Aries goes to war about things to do with idealism. Now, the great thing here, and I mentioned this yesterday, is Venus is in her own sign, so she's much stronger than Neptune. So there's this kind of warring energy about things where things aren't right, things aren't fair, and this is also like Neptune in the sign of Aries. Aries is looking to defend itself. So there is this kind of difficult situation to defend, because again, Neptune is a bit woolly, a bit difficult to define, gets very, very upset about ideals, but isn't necessarily the best planet for self-expression. He's very much through the veils. You might have to dig deep to get to the real upset, the real cause underneath things, but he still wants to go to war about this. And then we've got Venus in Libra absolutely looking for peace. And so, one of the things I'm asking here is, are you in a situation right now where what you want is kind of put on a back burner to create peace? Are you creating peace at the expense of yourself? And if so, where? And how is that going to work long term? Would be a good question. It feels like very much like there's a me versus us kind of an energy. Like Venus in the sign of Libra is very much about us. But Neptune in Aries is very much about me, and those unexpressed needs are really wanting to be heard right now, and yet there's this desire to keep the peace. And like, how do we balance that? Together, these planets can absolutely bring us to tenderness and romance and a really spiritual energy, like a cumulative, it's almost like a fragrance. It's like a thing of beauty when Neptune and Venus work beautifully together. I mean, they are gorgeous. It's unmistakable. It's that feeling of like everything is right in the world, but right now they're in opposition. And that's really pulling situations apart. Now, the final thing I want to mention is Moon in a square to Saturn. So if you have a look, Saturn's also in Aries, and the Moon's going to be in the sign of Cancer, which the Moon is stronger in, thankfully. But the Moon, and thankfully this is quite a quick, easy moving flow of energy, but the Moon is about our feelings and our inspiration, our intuition, and especially the heart and the family, especially in the sign of Cancer. It's very much about the how do I protect the family, and that square to Saturn is just showing up as cold, hard authority, cold, forceful, bossy, punitive authority. Like Saturn in Aries is a bit of a mean boss, a mean parent. This is a, I mean, Saturn in Aries isn't actually mean, that's unfair to say that, but at his worst expression could be that cold, forceful, pushy, directive, determined parent or boss or situation. That situation where there's a hot-headed, strong force coming against you, when the Moon in Cancer is yielding and wanting to protect their children and wanting to protect themselves and wanting to protect the vulnerable. It feels like there's this very strong energy of vulnerability. So this is, I think this could be quite a sharp day, and if you're already feeling into it, then most likely you're an empath, or you've got something in the early degrees of the cardinal signs, and or you've got something that's being aspected in the early degrees of the fixed signs. And if you've got planets in the early degrees of fixed and cardinal, most likely you're really feeling under pressure right now, because there's a lot of stuff happening. We're coming into the solar eclipse in another 2 days on the 12th. And all of this is just going to, I think, foment. It's just getting stronger. Final thought, and I haven't mentioned this in any of the other forecasts, I don't think, but on Wednesday the 12th, Pluto he's still in Aquarius, and he's going to be in Aquarius for ages, but he's changing his orientation. So, like, all of these positions here in the birth chart are showing where the planets are across the ecliptic. Longitudinally, we're looking at where on the ecliptic it's almost like an address. So Pluto right now is at 3:56 in the sign of Aquarius, and as he moves forwards or backwards, he changes his address. But the planets are also perceived to go up and down, and when they go down or up beyond a certain threshold, they're called out of bounds, and this is where they're not working in accordance to the sun. Like, the sun is our star in our solar system. That's what we've all been taught, and the sun is in charge of all the planets. But when a planet goes out of bounds, i.e. goes too high relative to the sun or too low in their relative height, then a new pattern comes in, and the planets are really themselves, and they're not kept in line. A bit like a teacher at school. The teacher is there making sure the kid at the back is paying attention. Well, Pluto is that kid in the back, and for the first time in, I think, 50 years, he's going out of bounds. And historically, and I've mentioned it in one forecast, historically, when he goes out of bounds, and he'll be going out of bounds for, I think, 5 to 6 months for the next 10 years. So he's out of bounds, then just slightly back in, then out, then in, then out, then in. When he's out of bounds, it's when people start to come back into their power. So they're wanting to claim back any power that they felt has been lost. When he's under the regulation of the sun, Pluto, it really shows where power exists, and kind of it shows a time when the governments get stronger, the corporations get stronger. To me, this is us coming back into our power as people, as individuals, especially in the sign of Aquarius. This is about power to the people. All of us are starting to come back into our birthright power. We're recognizing something about us. So when we also factor that in, and how rare that is at a time when we've got some very big questions, and difficult conversations, with this Chiron Mercury square, and also Venus in an opposition to Neptune, showing that we're fighting for something that feels really right, that we stand up to this, and also the Saturn Moon square. Monday doesn't feel all that comfortable. It just feels like there's a lot churning beneath the surface. So I'm going to leave that with you. I know this is called Feel Good Astrology, and I recognize we can't feel good all the time. I mean that, unless you're consciously activating a feel good feeling all the time. And of course, if you can do that, brilliant. To me, I'm trying to navigate what's showing in terms of the planets and what effects they might bring in, and I just think Monday is a bit challenging, especially if it's activating your chart in a strong way. My final thought then, just before I go, is if you need any help with this, then just check out my links below. It's easy to book an appointment with me. My details are below. And if you join my free community, you'll also get a 5% discount. So there's help from me if you need it. And wishing you lots and lots of love. Take care and speak soon. Bye for now.